Welcome to the Chef's Manifesto London Action Hub event. It's an On Bed Gardens presentation, and we're focusing on the United Nations Food Systems Summit 2021 Action Track 2. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a little bit of time to fill while everybody joins in. We have lots of participants and guests joining us, so I'm just waiting for those people to arrive. A quick introduction. My name is Arthur Potts-Dawson. I'm a chef advocate for the World Food Programme, and also chef advocate or action chef for the Chef's Manifesto. Lots of Chef's Manifesto chefs will be joining us today. We have a number of them here already. We have Tom Hunt, we have Tom Spacey, and hopefully chefs will be joining us from all over the world. We have some fabulous speakers. I'll be introducing each one of them as we go rather than all now because we've got so many. But just a little bit of context for everyone. Across the planet, we've got a lack of nutritious food and it's undermining health. And it's essential that we begin to understand our consumption patterns in more depth and understand that healthy food and the food systems are driven by consumer choice and our actions. So as consumers, we all have a choice, and our choices drive food production locally and globally. Our sustainable purchasing boosts nature-positive production and can contribute to poverty alleviation. We're focusing on Action Track 2, which is to shift to healthy and sustainable consumption patterns on the planet. And, Action Track 2 is focusing on building consumer demand for sustainably produced food, to strengthen local value chains, improve nutrition, promote the reuse and recycling of food resources, especially among the most valuable. We've got some brilliant people to talk about this in more detail. So I'm not going to go on too much longer, but just to give some context as to why we're meeting today. And it's fabulous to have chefs from all over the world and people joining us from the general public. If you can, do please put in the chat box to the right-hand side of your screen where you're from. It'd be really interesting to know that. If you want to put your hand up or put a message into the chat box, we are watching it and making sure that we ask all the questions that you ask us. But if you're a guest, you won't have access to just sort of to speak. We'll say it for you in the chat box. We are going to be running for about 4 hours. We've got 5 different sections, one of this being one of them. And we have Paul Noonan, who is part of the presentation crew, joining us in a minute. Now, to keep up with time, we have to make sure that we're strict. So we can't really go too much over time. So, of course, me talking too much means we're going over time. What I'd like to do is we're going to introduce a video from Gunhild Storderlund, who is the head of the EAT Forum. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about the Action Track 2, her involvement in it, the Food Systems Summit, and perhaps a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals. So welcome to the Chef's Manifesto Action Hub event, hosted by On Bed Gardens. We welcome you, thank all the speakers for being here, and we welcome all of the guests signing in as we speak. So if we could play the video from Gunhild, and we're going to start the event.
Hi guys, great to be able to say a few words to you here today. You as chefs, as you know, you are the rock stars of our food systems. And right now, we need those rock stars more than ever. Because as you know, what we eat, how much we waste, and how we produce our food, the food system is currently failing both people and planet. And without fixing it, without fixing food, we simply don't stand a chance of delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals, nor the Paris Climate Agreement. This is something that the United Nations finally understands, and why the Secretary General has called for the first ever Food Systems Summit happening later this fall in September. The ambition for the summit is really to shift food from being a cause of so many problems to being a key solution to fix it for both people and planet. I've been lucky to be tasked on leading Action Track 2 on shifting to sustainable, healthy consumption patterns. And together with the 4 other action tracks, we are now working around the clock to crowdsource big ideas, game-changing systemic solutions from around the world, and working with stakeholders, including member states and private sector and civil society, to translate big ideas into commitments and game-changing action on the ground. The good thing about this is that the science is clear. Food can indeed fix it, or at least fix a lot of it. And it's still time to turn it around. Indeed, we can feed 10 billion people enough healthy food within safe environmental limits. But that requires a transformation of the current system. It requires shifting to regenerative, sustainable production practices. It requires halving food waste and loss, and it requires shifting diets. We have to eat much more of the good stuff. We have to eat healthy, more plant-rich diets with legumes, vegetables, nuts, fish, whole grains, etc. And we need to cut dramatically back on ultra-processed junk food. And we also have to, especially in high-income, high-consuming countries, cut back on red and processed meats. And less but better is the thing. But if we do all these things, not only can we help tackle climate change and protect the planet, but we can help save 11 million every year and improve the health and well-being of millions more. Is it going to be easy? No. Yet I remain a hardcore optimist. Why? Because food is such a powerful connector. Food connects people, it connects agendas, it connects global challenges to our daily choices, and it's something that most people, well, at least around 5 billion people, can do something about. Because at the end of the day, we are all stakeholders of the food system. At the end of the day, we all eat. That is the common denominator for us as human beings. And food connects people, not only around the table, but across borders, across cultures, across sectors. It connects chefs to scientists, to farmers, to policymakers. But the thing is, and why we need your help. Nobody will eat more of the right stuff unless it tastes, looks, and smells delicious. Simply, if it doesn't taste good, it's not a solution, like my friend Sam Cass is saying. Hence why we need you, chefs and other food workers, and why you are the real rock stars. With your skills, your vision, your creativity, you are making change palatable, delicious, aspirational, and palatable. Best of luck with the event. I really look forward to working with you. Enjoy the day.
Okay, so thank you to Gunhild. And again, thank you for people who are just joining us or just dialing in. The numbers are ratcheting up nicely. Hello to Paul Noonan. I know you joined us from Australia. It's, I think, raining heavily out there. How are you, Paul? All right?
Going well, Arthur. Sorry I was running a bit late. I was chatting to Agnes, the special envoy for the Food Systems Summit. So I was on topic, but just in a different conversation. So apologies for being a bit late, but super excited to be with everyone today.
I thought for you to miss the London Action Hub's first event of the year, it must be very important. We're time conscious, but I wonder, perhaps you could introduce Mario and him setting the scene for Action Track 2 for the Food Systems Summit. You're fresh off a call there, so it's in your mind. I'll hand it over to you, Paul, for a minute or two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So thank you so much, Arthur, and it's so great to hear from Gunhild, who is leading Action Track 2. And so we're going to now hear from somebody else in the dark in Australia at the moment. So Dr. Mario Costa from the CSIRO, which is a key research institution based in Australia. And Mario is one of the key scientific advisors for the UN Food Systems Summit. And so the UN Food Systems Summit is really focused on being informed by science in the decisions that are being taken. And Mario is one of the trusted advisors working on informing with that science. And so we've asked Mario to come. He's working particularly on Action Track 2, which is around sustainable consumption. And so, Mario, we're going to hand over to you for the next about 10 minutes and then maybe come back with a question or so. So please, Mario, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. Yes, so I'll introduce the topic of how to transition towards sustainable food consumption patterns in an integrated way. Next slide, please. Yeah, yeah. So, definitely, we've all converged on the idea that we really need more sustainable food systems. Here, I'm just putting just the first page of some of the essential reports that have come out in the last couple of years. From the IPCC, the Eat Lancet Commission, the FAO reports, all telling us that we definitely need to change. Next slide, please. And why do we need to change? Well, because there's an enormous amount of malnutrition in all its forms occurring at the moment, and we haven't managed to stop it. Just some examples: 200 million children under 5 affected by malnutrition. 800 billion is the cost of NCDs at the moment. And that is actually just tremendous. Imagine, these are non-communicable diseases like diabetes, like heart disease, all very related to the way we eat food. At the same time, we know that climate change will affect significantly how we consume and produce food, and this is likely to increase costs and increase the unfairness of the food system that we experience at the moment. And the food system per se is a very important source of emissions. Look, between 21 and 37% of anthropogenic emissions, when you take into account from production to consumption, when you take into account the whole value chain, we are actually generating heaps of emissions. So we need to do something more about this. And on top of that, we've heard in many occasions about Johan Rockström's planetary boundaries, where we're exceeding several of the planetary boundaries associated with especially biodiversity laws, the nitrogen cycles, and others that are important. And on top of that, we have the power asymmetries and policy distortions that we will talk about later. But we can do a lot about this. Please, next slide. On one hand, we've held that we need to move towards healthy diets, and there was the big Eat Lancet report that actually told us basically, hey, we need to reconfigure what we have on the plate. Many years ago, the steak or the big piece of meat was the star of the dish. But nowadays, what we're saying is, well, let's make the veggies the star of the dish, and let's still consume some adequate amounts of animal source foods. But let's be more diverse in our sources of consumption. Let's think a little bit more of where things are coming from, how they are produced, and so on. And let's use the variety of delicious food that exists in the planet. Here's an example. We actually took some photographs of what would a healthy diet per week for an Australian adult look like. And you can see, well, it's quite varied actually. It obviously lacks all those discretionary junk foods that you can imagine. But look, there's plenty that you can do delicious recipes with. Please, the next slide. Having said that, we are far away, really far away from achieving healthy consumption patterns. This was also something from the Eat Lancet report, where if you look at the line of the 100, that's basically what we would need to consume to achieve a healthy diet from a sustainable food system. And what we see here is that we get, well, especially in certain regions, overconsumption of some of the animal source foods. In other places, we don't get enough, so we need to still consuming, like in East Asia, the Pacific, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. But basically, there's no region that consumes enough vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, and nuts. This is what Gunhild was talking about. Really, all the wholesome food that we could have. Why? You might wonder, well, what can we do to address this? Next slide, please. And one of the things that we've observed is that there are not enough not enough fruit and vegetables produced nor consumed. If this is a slide from a piece of work that we did, where if you look, for example, at the global averages, the last line, you would think, well, look, on average, excluding food waste, we would have enough. You see that last line, excluding food waste, where you see some green, that 1.34, we would in theory have enough. But when we really start looking at what would happen if we really take the food waste percentages that are prevalent in fruit and vegetable value chains, this will really change the picture. 33% is on average what we're wasting at the moment. Fruits and vegetables have very, very short very short spans. They can get bruised and so on. So there's a lot of rejection. But of course, with circularity and with circular redeploying all that waste in other ways, we could actually do enormous good to really reutilize some of those products. Next slide, please. The other big problem that we have is that the Eat Lancet diet, for example, which is an example of a healthy diet from a sustainable food system, is still too expensive for 1.5 billion people. In reality, this is more prevalent in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. But also this relates very much to a supply issue, because in many cases, we simply don't have enough of the food sources to actually, of the healthy food sources to make them cheap enough for most consumers. So in reality, we need an integrated view of how to really modify consumption patterns here. Let's move to the next slide, please. And this is really about, well, how can we actually use nutrition and the kinds of foods that we need as a driver for shaping the supply response in agriculture? We really need not only the healthy diets, but we also need sustainable food systems. And just imagine these two pictures that I have here from Google Earth. One from Iowa in the US, producing a lot of primarily maize. Or you have this northern India landscape, all atomized with little farms and everybody producing a little bit of lentils, a little bit of milk, a little bit of probably rice, wheat, etc. So think about it. Well, how do we compare these kind of production systems in terms of nutrition security? What's better for the agroecosystem's health, for risk management? Imagine a big pest on that maize field in Iowa. It would put us at considerable risk. But on the other hand, how do we reach all these small producers of food that might be in many ways might be growing food in a more organic way and everything, but at the same time not yielding enough, not having enough yields to live a proper livelihood and so on. So we really need to think of what are the kinds of systems that we want in the future. Next slide, please. And this brings us to the need for a societal conversation. What do we really want from our food system? We need really a joint vision among stakeholders, and this is where chefs obviously are a very important stakeholder, but here we need to really engage with private industry, with civil society, with consumers of all sorts, with the farmers, etc., and really try to achieve this joint vision and plan adequate transition pathways of the future that we want. And this is why we're here in the Food Summit, trying to move a little step closer towards achieving that. This whole idea of the future that we want from our food system and generate that change. Can we actually move to the next slide, please? On top of that, apart from the multitude of farmers doing great work in trying to give us food and trying to manage the land per se, we have also an enormous amount of technology and technology that in many cases is future technology, things that are just being tested where they will help enormously in creating more circular food systems, in increasing the sustainability of the whole system and across the value chain. In many cases, this is not only about what we produce, but also how do we actually come to more benign processing of foods to increase their shelf life of vegetables and fruits. We're talking also about personalized nutrition. We're talking about a range of things. And, it's not about silver bullets. It's really about picking combinations of all these things in packages, in specific contexts and so on, so that we can really move the agenda forward. Next slide, please. Then on top of that, ultimately what we want and which sometimes people don't discuss enough is really fairness. It's really equity. It's really getting a balance between the needs of low and middle income countries and also the needs of the OECD or the high income countries. And we need to really start thinking, how do we reduce the inequalities in the food system in general? At the end, this was a salient point of the Global Nutrition Report from last year, that we really need to think of the lowest common denominator. How are we going to reach different sectors of society in a way that everybody has access and can enjoy delicious food? And last slide, please. Hello. Next slide, please. Hello, can you hear me?
Sorry, Mario, we just made Paul the host. Paul, you're going to have to unlock yourself to allow us to click the slides.
Paul, can you make me co-host, because I can no longer make Mario's slides move.
Apologies, I'm doing it. Sorry, Mario.
No worries. Yeah.
We're just doing the back end for the Facebook, so sorry.
Cool.
Okay, it should work now. Jen?
Can I see the rest of the slide, please? Oh, I'm sorry. I have a super cool photograph there. I don't know what happened. No, it's actually not that one. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that it will be really expensive at the beginning, but the costs of inaction will be even higher in the future. So we really need to act now in all of this, all the way from production to consumption to achieve the sustainable patterns that we really want. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you so much. I think it really gives us a very, very good taste of what the Action Track 2 is aiming at. There's important, hopefully you've managed to capture all that. Remember, we are recording this and we will be putting this back out on different channels after this.
Sure.
We're going to be putting up a number of panel questions or questions to the general public as well. Have a little think about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Partly the reason why the UN Food System Summit's been set up is in reaction to seeing if food and agriculture can impact positively on the planet in future. That's part of the Food System Summit. So thank you, Mario. Mario, I wonder if you could answer a question. We had a question.
Yeah, of course.
About land ownership getting more and more divided in poor countries, and about the difficulties that the people are facing in this kind of in the sort of future food systems. Have you addressed that or talked through that at all, about understanding division of land and maybe less land being made available to people in poor countries?
Yeah, well, this is a very active area where we're doing a lot of research, and yes, there is a lot of fragmentation in some parts of the world, and smallholders as producers of food, will probably, in many countries, not be able to make a decent living out of just agriculture. But they, you know, as their kids get more educated, as you know, as society changes, as population densities increase, and new income sources are found, a lot of these small farmers are depending a lot from off-farm income. So in many cases, you know, it's really integrated livelihoods what we want to achieve for these smallholder producers. Many of them live in high productive areas of the world, and you know, they could be actually great providers of some of the fruits and vegetables that could be grown in many of these communities. So, you know, we really need to think about these small landholders as entrepreneurs with many dimensions, and no longer just as food producers.
Thank you, Mario. Now we need to go at a rate of knots here. I'm afraid we're 4 minutes over already. I can see that Karen has asked a quick question about what would be the most expensive part of this transition. Have you got a quick answer to what is the most expensive area to do with this type of transitioning?
Well, you know, for the transition to work, especially if we have to reconfigure some of the farming systems and contract some sectors and increase other sectors, that transition of really reconfiguring the production side of things with the necessary markets, value chains, and others will be one of the things that will actually take enormous time and expense.
Thank you, Mario. Mario, I wonder if you can see in the questions, there's a number of different questions coming in from Samuel and Jack Tattershall about wealthy professionals and farming, etc. I don't know if you could drop a few answers to some of those questions. That'd be really helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I will.
Across to Alison because we're time poor. Alison, hi. You're going to be talking about sustainable consumption patterns and having a pragmatic approach to action, because action is what we're looking for and outcomes. So thank you for joining us, Alison. I've had an amazing opportunity to meet you and look at the work you've done, well, with Kellogg's over the past 20 years, but now you're I keep these polls keep showing up in front of me.
That was the result.
Yeah, now you're presenting yourself, aren't you, Alison? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you want to talk about?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Arthur and Paul, and actually the rest of the team at ONVED and Chef's Manifesto. It's wonderful. I actually can't see my slides. Is that me or is that? Do you need to put your slides up?
We're just having a share screen. Are we doing it?
They're on their way.
They're coming.
Is that just me? Okay.
Here they are.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. Well, delighted to be part of this progressive conversation today. And as we kind of pivot to action, I really thought, how do you follow Gunhild and Mario, who have clearly outlined the need to change, the what's and the whys, and we're moving very, very seriously through to kind of the hows, and rightly so, because we need to kind of act very, very quickly. So today I've put some kind of thoughts together about pollinators for action, just some very practical and pragmatic thoughts as we go through our various kind of game-changing solutions. Thinking about, you know, what could unlock some of those hows. So it's just so wonderful that we're starting to see this convening coming together for kind of people, planet, and prosperity. And this year, the year of change, you know, is so significant. I've never certainly seen it in the last kind of 20, 30 years of this kind of convening of disciplines of people from all over the world in all sorts of kind of places to put ideas on the table to make those sustainable consumption changes. Yet there's complexity at play here, isn't there? Food systems in its mere definition is a system, it's a food system, and it's complex. And there's multiple decisions and choices to be made. at many, many, many levels, in many places, at many times of the day. And I would say we do need to also have that careful translation as we're moving from those global goals right through to the national goals and through to the individual. How do we translate with grace and with real deep insights? And that's what I wanted to go through today with you. So we go on the next slide, please. So my first kind of pause for thought is less of a pollinator. It's probably an anti-pollinator if there is such thing. And, you know, given the complexity and the choices that we have to make, which is, you know, an unparalleled amount of choices, there's this paradox of choice. So there's human nature to take something that's very, very complex, and there's a temptation often to oversimplify. And I see that we often create what I call heroes and villains. We're very familiar with film narratives. We're very comfortable with the notion of a goodie and a baddie. And we use that very, very frequently in order to kind of demystify complex solutions. And so we see this at play, whether you look at policy, whether you look at disciplines, whether you look at geographies, or even within foods as well. And so you might hear for the rest of the day something that is cited as nature versus kind of nutrition. I must admit, when I heard that cited, I think again last week, I was absolutely horrified, because are we really going to put nature and nutrition as opposing kind of heroes and villains? I can't think of better kind of marriage of kind of nature's bounty, nourishing people from all over the world. And yet there's a temptation to do that. So we also see it within kind of big food, small food, so hero, villain. We see it in the raging debate that we have over red meat versus the vegan kind of philosophy and ideology, and milk versus plant-based alternatives. There are many, many, many examples. And I would argue sometimes that brings unintended consequences. If you have a hero and villain, is the solution somewhere in the middle? You know, is that compromise area where we need to be seeking? And my question to you, or my kind of words of maybe kind of caution to you, is really just watch how you deploy your heroes and villains, and just watch for those unintended consequences. Next slide, please. So my first pollinator is, and as I said, many of these are super obvious, because, you know, the insights that we, you know, that are very, very powerful often are very obvious. They're called aha moments for a reason. And the first one is about context. So as we start to translate those global goals into kind of national goals and into the individual, context is absolutely everything. And without such, we're not going to make those behavioural changes that we so desperately need. And so thinking about that translation kind of curve, you know, how do we take into account culture, economics, values, norms, requirements? If you think about nutrition requirements from the cradle to the grave, how different that is. And if you look at this beautiful young lady from India, her requirements very, very different to the beautiful lady that we see here in Iceland and in China, etc. So how do we just make sure that we're really, really cognizant of context? Are you aware of that, or are you making assumptions? Next slide, please. My next pollinator is thinking about diversity and diet, rather than individual foods or plants or crops. And when I say diversity here, I mean in terms of dietary diversity, crop and plant diversity, because we know that that's key to underpin our ability to kind of either nourish people and planet, but also a key cornerstone to address food security, malnutrition, and indeed biodiversity. And so when we look at dietary diversity, when working well, we have, you know, various food groups that we're eating, consuming, enjoying, celebrating on a regular basis. And those in turn provide kind of nutrients, macronutrients, micronutrients, phytonutrients that are really going to nourish and be important for cognitive function, for immune system support, for cardiovascular disease, for gut health, a whole host of kind of physical health attributes. And yet we know that dietary diversity isn't the norm for everyone around the world. We have over 2 billion who are kind of inadequate in terms of their micronutrient status. So dietary diversity isn't the norm, and how do we address that? And we also, when we look to kind of our dietary choices and the diverse nature of our ingredients, how does that impact biodiversity? Well, we have a global over-reliance on 4 core crops, and those are wheat, and those are rice and potatoes and maize. And in turn, those 4 crops, remember we have 30,000 edible species, but just 4 crops provide over 65% of our global calories. So clearly we're not getting diversity right, either dietary or crop or plant diversity. So my question to you is, how are you thinking about diversity? What does your plate look like? What does your store cupboard look like? What does your portfolio mix look like? What does your supply chain, your procurement mix look like? And are you really diverse, and where's your volume really lie? Next slide, please. So my next pollinator is thinking about frequency and amount. And I believe, and many others believe, that kind of it's about dietary patterns, and it's about kind of behaviors in the amount that you do and the frequency in which you kind of you act. And of course, that impact can be both positive and negative. And so if we take some of these examples of on the screen just now, if we recycle a plastic bottle maybe once every 2 months, are you going to have the impact there that you so desperately need? Probably not. Look at those. Well, look at those beautiful macarons. You know, they look delicious. They're just so beautiful. If I have a couple of those every month, is that going to impact my waistline or my dental health? Probably not. If I have 4 a day, every day, will they impact negatively? Yes, probably. Again, the raging debate on red meat, we clearly see that frequency and amount is at play here. We have some populations in the world that are eating too much, too frequently and in large amounts. And yet we have other populations who are probably not eating enough red meat in order to deliver some of those micronutrients that that community needs, frequency and amount. And those beautiful tomatoes, rich in lycopene, you know, eaten in generous quantities on a frequent basis, they're likely to have a positive impact on your antioxidant status. So my examples here are largely around food, but I would argue you can extend this concept beyond just food and the ingredients. So if you think about frequency and amount in how much you promote a food, food advertising, appearance on your menus, if you think about in your fridge, in your basket, on your plate, where is the frequency and amount, and is that having a positive or a negative impact? Where's your volume really lie? Next slide, please. And my next pollinator is thinking about behavior and taking the insights that we have from behavioral science and putting that at the forefront of our action planning. Because whether we like it or not, our behavior is very highly context dependent. So that's why we say context is everything. And it may not reflect our attitudes, beliefs, or our values, you know, unbelievably. And why is that? Well, we're faced with complex decisions to make on a daily basis, on minute by minute basis, second by second. And as such, we take kind of cognitive shortcuts. So we often kind of, those cognitive shortcuts are often called system one thinking, fast, rapid fire, emotional decisions that you make in the moment. And that's system one thinking, and largely many of our food choices are made using that emotive kind of decision making, rather than system two thinking, which is reflective and might actually bring to the fore kind of those belief systems in terms of values and attitudes. So what do we do with that? Well, don't do the telling, you know, don't be very rational when you're trying to kind of incite a behavior change. Instead, look for the emotional kind of insight there. As marketeers, I'm not a marketeer, but I've worked with many for many years. They often use the 5 whys. So it's only when you get to the 5th why that you're truly kind of at the bedrock of emotional insight, really understanding what matters and what behavioral problem you're trying to solve for. So use your 5 emotional whys as you're trying to think about your behavior change, and think about your framing. So remember system 1 thinking. How do you make it easy? How do you kind of pivot into those default moments? How do you make it appealing rather than talking at length about the impact it might have on the planet? Instead, talk about how beautiful it is, the visual cues, the semiotics, the taste, aroma, and even colour can often kind of trigger that behaviour change rather than something that's very rational. And as such, you kind of fold that into your cultural norms and you start to nudge behaviour. So using kind of behaviour lens as a key driver for change. Next slide, please. So my question to you is, you know, as we start to move into the hows and we're starting to translate those big global ideas into game-changing moments, how do we start to think about those pollinator moments? How do we think about kind of context is everything? Are you diverse? Are you diverse on your plate? Are you diverse on your communications? Thinking about diet rather than individual foods and crops. Are you over-reliant on those 4 crops? Thinking about frequency and amounts. You know, are you making a positive or a negative impact there? And really importantly, you know, having that behaviour lens, thinking about system 1 thinking. How do I appeal? How do I understand that emotional insight that's context driven as well to make that positive change? And finally, really, we all love a great film, but I urge you to really think about your heroes and villains and honestly deploy them with caution and understand that they can have an unintended consequence if you do so. Next slide. So with that, hopefully that gives you some insights to start to make a conscious impact, and whether that's in your kind of your plate, your spoon, your menu, your waste bin, ingredients, crops, baskets, policy, or communications. Let's collectively make the change that we so desperately need. So thank you so much.
Wow.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you so much. Heroes and villains. I'm like a big comic book fan, and I love having a villain, and I love having a hero. But sometimes it's the villains which we place as these sort of big pharma companies or big food companies, and I've worked with a few of them. Sometimes a little change from a big company can make a massive difference. And is it consumers who can apply that pressure? Who can apply the most pressure to a big food company?
Who? The consumer, often. You know, we really do vote with our plates and our spoons and our bowls, and you know, but there's, you know, big food and often for small food really engage with the consumer because they've got those behavioural kind of insights so kind of right. And how do we use that understanding and that approach to drive other changes? So yeah, the consumer, vote with your plate, vote with your shopping basket, and you know, that's what drives behaviour in big food and small food, I would argue.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. And if anybody would like to ask Alison questions, please drop them into the Q&A. Alison says she's very happy to answer questions in the Q&A, which is on the bottom right-hand side of your screen.